The new Player's Handbook is finally here, bringing updates to D&D 5th edition for everything from classes and feats to weapons and spells. But is this a real facelift for the game, or just a cash grab to mark D&D's 50th anniversary? In this video, I want to give you my thoughts on how this version of 5e shakes things up, including both the changes I like and the ones I think fall short. These are just my opinions based on my first impressions of the text. I'm sure when I start using the rules and see how they do at my table, my opinions might change. But for now, these are my initial reactions. Without further ado, let's get started. Unlike the old Player's Handbook, which dove straight into building a character, this new guide starts with an extensive section on the core rules. You know, how to actually play the game. I really like this change. The old version feels like putting the cart before the horse, trying to explain classes and character abilities before teaching people the basics of what D&D is all about. And this doesn't just port over the old wording either, this greatly expands it, with much clearer language on the rules, wonderful artwork, and more examples of gameplay that make it easy for someone who's never played D&D to see how it works. The presentation of the book across the board is way better than the 2014 version, and it really feels like they put a lot of thought into making this even more accessible for folks who aren't as knowledgeable about tabletop games. There's also a rules glossary in the back of the book, so if you ever need to look something up, you can just go through an alphabetized list of the rules and find it way easier. My only real gripe is that it does tend to rely on that glossary a little too much at times. Some things that really should be spelled out in the text are instead given the old, you can find this in the glossary treatment. Conditions are a good example. Instead of having a few pages dedicated to what each one does in a single spot, you have to go to the rules glossary and individually search for each one. While you're playing D&D, that's not a big deal, but if you're learning, that's pretty annoying. Still, I love the attention to detail that went into laying out the book and how it presents information. Even though the book looks and reads differently, the core rules of D&D 5e are basically the same. While things like classes, background, and spells got some pretty major updates, this is still largely the game players have been running at their tables for 10 years. Turns play out as they always have. Advantage and disadvantage still have a major role in almost everything. Skills, ability scores, modifiers, movement, rolling to attack, casting a spell, all of it fundamentally works the same way. There are rule changes, I'll talk about some in a minute, but if you already don't like D&D 5e and we're hoping for a new gameplay experience, this isn't the update for you. That said, there are enough differences that it's worth going through some of them and seeing how they'll affect the game. Actions have been expanded a bit, with a few being renamed or slightly reworked, and a couple new ones were added. Of note, you now need proficiency in a skill or tool to help on an ability check. Love that. And the search action has a buddy in study. Searching is for finding things, like a hidden object or a creature's motivations, and study is for trying to recall information on something. Small changes, but at least they put thought into them. There are two actions that I want to highlight though. Hide and influence. Hide isn't anything new, but the main difference is now when you attempt to sneak, you have to succeed on a DC 15 stealth check, regardless of the passive or active perception of who you're trying to get past. I can see why they made this change, since passive perception is one of those rules new players and DMs struggle with, and having a static DC is easier to remember, but once hidden, they have to consult the passive perceptions of anyone around to know if they see you. It specifies that whatever you rolled is the DC to be found, so why have a baseline check anyway? And this means that for lower level characters, getting past weak enemies like bandits and guards, which have scores of 10 and 12 respectively, will be tougher. This isn't a major change, but I'm not sure it was a necessary one. I feel the same about the influence action. With it, you can attempt to convince a creature that understands you to do something. The rules make clear that if the DM decides the monster is unwilling, that whatever you're asking goes too far, you fail. But if it's possible, the creature is hesitant, the rules say, you roll a charisma check to see if they comply, and the DC is 15 or the creature's intelligence score, whichever one is higher, so the DM can of course change this. You also get advantage or disadvantage if the creature is friendly or hostile, though most will be indifferent, like shopkeepers and random strangers who ask for directions. I think this is overall a good change. It makes it very clear what the limits of skills like persuasion and deception are, while giving newer DMs the mechanics to latch onto as they figure out the role-playing side of things. But I also have a feeling that most experienced groups will end up ignoring this. I think a lot of tables run charisma checks like this already, without the added steps of determining the creature's attitude to the player and if it's hesitant or unwilling. I think a lot of DMs just kind of get a feel for that sort of thing as they play more, but it's good to have a place in the text at least to point to when your players try to convince the king to give up their kingdom. If nothing else, that's worth some clunky mechanics. Conditions are largely the same as you remember. Most work just like they did before or have slightly different language, but a few do have changes that are worth noting. Grappled has been given a bit of a boost, giving creatures disadvantage on attacks against anyone but the one who's grappling them. That's slightly better, though they also changed how you grapple. It's a saving throw rather than a contested check. I definitely like contested checks better. Both people participate, it's easier to understand than having to calculate a DC, and I think thematically it fits the idea of two people wrestling for control better. But it's not that crazy of a change. Besides grapple, they added a new condition called invisible. That basically replaces being unseen. It makes clear everything that happens when you magically disappear or hide in a way that's nice and concise. Though I do still think it's kind of dumb that invisibility doesn't grant you advantage on stealth checks, but what can you do? On the flip side, the surprise condition has been removed, and instead it's folded into other effects. If you somehow get the drop on enemies, like by being invisible, you get advantage on initiative, and if they sneak up on you, you have disadvantage. That's kind of boring. I know that surprise was probably the least understood condition in the game. Lots of tables and DMs use surprise rounds instead, myself included, which are admittedly way too powerful, but this feels like they kind of just gave up on it rather than finding a solution that works better. What if earning surprise gave you an extra action or a single attack or cantrip? I don't know. I feel like they could have tried more, especially since it makes it kind of silly when the rogue rolls 30 on stealth, tries firing their bow at an enemy, and then still gets beaten in initiative, so it was all for nothing. Not a change I like. Lastly, exhaustion has been reworked. Instead of each level coming with different debuffs, you subtract 2 times the exhaustion level from every D20 test, and your speed is reduced by 5 times the same level. It's simpler and easier to remember. A good change in my book. But of all the conditions to update, was exhaustion really the one that needed it most? Grappled and deafened could have used more love, while ones like paralyzed and stunned probably could have been balanced so they aren't a total fun killer when players and monsters are hit by them. Exhaustion doesn't even come up very much in D&D. They did add some rules for eating and drinking that I'm confident very few tables will pay attention to. But if you're going to take the time to change it, why not add more spells and class abilities that cause exhaustion? Overall, conditions are fine, but I would have liked to see them balance a few more to make them both challenging to handle and fun to contend with. Overall, are the core rules insanely different from vanilla 5e? No. But for me, what they did change is a mixed bag. Some good, some bad. But where the game has changed quite a bit is in character creation. From species to backgrounds to classes, a lot has been reworked when building your perfect hero. Let's start with the basics. Every class has been updated in the new player's handbook. Some, like monks and barbarians, have been given complete overhauls, while others were barely touched, like wizards. Of course, these changes vary from class to class, but overall, I really like what they've done here. One of the biggest upgrades is that martials have a lot more options at their disposal. In old 5e, most martial classes had a few tactical choices they could make on a turn, but it mostly just boiled down to hitting a few times with their weapon and moving on. Martials of all types have been given more abilities, whether it's monks using their focus points to power stronger moves, barbarians customizing their reckless attacks to deal extra effects, or rogues forsaking damage on sneak attack to instead harass their enemies in new ways. Weapon-focused characters have more options at their disposal every turn. And this is coupled with weapon mastery too. Each weapon now has a mastery ability that gives extra effects and bonuses to the user, but only if your class can access them. Getting to choose which weapons you mastered and how to apply them on the battlefield is one change that I really love. It's not just martials who have gotten stronger though. Arguably all of these versions of the classes are more powerful than their 2014 counterparts. Except maybe druids, Wild Shape did get a pretty big debuff for the sake of balance. Most classes have been given new ways to use their signature abilities, like extra meta magic options for sorcerers, or fighters using second wind to power ability checks, not just give back HP. With more ways to use their abilities, they'll be burning through things like Wild Shape, Bardic Inspiration, and Rages more often, but they've also been given new and improved ways to recover those abilities. For example, at level 5, bards and druids can burn a spell slot to get back a Bardic Inspiration or Wild Shape. At higher levels, giving up a first level spell slot isn't a big deal. More classes benefit from short rests, and some abilities aren't expended when they fail in certain cases. These changes are great for players. Their characters are stronger, get access to their unique powers more often, and look like they'll be more fun to play than the old versions. But this does bring up my main concern. I'm interested to see how resource management and more powerful abilities affect encounter balance. As a DM, it's already not easy to create difficult combat encounters. Challenge rating is a crapshoot, and you often have to throw a lot of different encounters at the party to get them to burn their resources, which isn't always fun or feasible. Sure, they have more ways to use those resources now, but they also have more ways to get them back. I could see a world in which combat in this version of 5e is even easier than the original, and where it really falls on the DM's shoulders to get creative or come up with crazy scenarios in order to challenge their players. But to be fair, we'll have to wait and see what enemies look like in the updated monster manual next year. It's entirely possible the enemies are getting a much needed upgrade, in which case balancing may be a lot easier. A few more notes on classes. everyone get their subclass at level 3 now, which is the change I'm in favor of. Keeps things even across the board as you're playing, and they've done a good job of either giving new abilities at early levels to fill the gaps, or moving up old ones so you can use them even quicker. Each class also gets 4 subclasses, which I again see the logic for in keeping things fair, but while some classes benefit from this, it is a bit strange to see clerics limited to only 4 domains, while wizards can't choose 4 of the 8 different schools of magic. I think every class could have gotten expanded options without taking away from those that already had enough. Also, it has to be said, not including artificers is a crime. I know it wasn't in the original Player's Handbook, but they've been in 5e for half of its lifespan. If you're playing an artificer in a campaign that's moving to this rule set, you get to watch all of your friends play around with new abilities and better versions of their class, while you get nothing. While I am pleasantly surprised by how many changes have been made to classes and how much of an upgrade the presentation and look of this book is over the last handbook, not including Artificer can only really feel like Wizards of the Coast looking at their bottom line and wanting people to still buy Tasha's. Regardless, I'm a big fan of what they've done here. I think players will be excited by these new class updates, and with more subclasses, abilities, and options than ever, this feels like a big upgrade over the original Player's Handbook. But there's more to characters than just their class, and those options have been updated too. After choosing your class, next comes a background. What sort of life did your character lead before going on an adventure? Most of the background options will be familiar if you played vanilla 5e. Acolyte, Charlatan, Criminal, and others make their return here. But there are new options, and the major update is that ability scores are now tied to your background, not your species, formerly your race in the old handbook. I think this change makes sense. Your life experience shapes your skills and abilities, so it makes way more sense to me that anyone of any species can get a boost to intelligence or charisma or dexterity due to their background. In this way, you can play as any class and any species without your choice hurting you. This gets a thumbs up for me. The other major change is that instead of the features you used to get from your background, like booking free passage on a ship as a sailor or staying at inns for free as an entertainer, you get a feat. That's cool, and these feats are probably more useful in everyday gameplay than the old features were, but I do miss the flavorful, roleplay focused abilities of old backgrounds. I'm not sure why they couldn't have left those in and given you a feat that's more mechanically viable. It's not the biggest difference, but something I wish they'd included. Speaking of feats, spoilers, they've been changed. They're now split into 2 categories, origin feats and general ones. You get one of the origin feats as part of your background, but as you level up and get access to more, you can still take those as an option if you want. Unlike in the old Player's Handbook, where feats were an optional rule, they're baked into the classes now, and there are even more options to choose from. A lot of feats have been reworked to make them either stronger or weaker. For example, Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter no longer let you subtract 5 from your roll for an extra 10 points of damage, so at high levels, they're not really a required feat anymore. They've also changed up some of the wording on feats to make them less cheesy. Sorry, Polearm Masters, that feat no longer works with Sentinel to completely nullify melee-based enemies. They've clearly put in a lot of effort to try and make more feats viable to choose. Beyond your ordinary feats, every class also gets an epic boon at level 19, and these are pretty cool. It's nice to give some customization to how broken you'd like your high-level character to be, rather than relying on the class you chose to give you something cool. That said, just like with regular feats, some epic boons definitely stand out more than others. The boon of True Sight gives you True Sight, which is cool, but kind of pales in comparison to boons that let you hit automatically when you miss once per turn, or give you proficiency in all skills. Not as impressive then. I'm sure as we start playing the game and trying out different feats, some will be obviously better than others. But every general feat also gives an ability score boost now, rather than just some of them doing so. Meaning, if you pick something suboptimal, you're still getting stronger regardless while having the flavor you wanted. I'm happy with how the feats were handled in this book. And interested to see what new broken combos will be discovered too. After background comes your species, humans, dwarves, elves, and the like. Species are pretty similar to their old counterparts, though options like Goliath and Azamar have been added, while half species have been removed. And honestly, that's kind of a shame. I know you could just flavor your orc or elf as having split origins, but I don't really see what's gained by taking them out. In a similar vein, there's a lot less info about each species and their history. Again, I understand that Wizards don't want to shoehorn people into playing each species the same way. I like the freedom to roleplay your character however you want, but a little more flavor text can go a long way in helping new players imagine their hero's origins, or giving DMs inspiration for running NPCs of a certain species. What we have in this book is a lot more condensed. Mechanically, species function very similar to how they did before, with the changes to ability scores I mentioned earlier. Each species does have their own unique abilities, but some definitely got the short end of the stick here. Dwarves get Tremor Sense for 10 minutes, which isn't terrible, but compare that to a Dragonborn's breath weapons, Goliaths growing in size and getting giant base powers, or Elves and Tieflings who can cast spells due to their lineage. It feels like they didn't spend as much time crafting cool abilities for every species, but each does have things that make them unique. Even tools and equipment have been updated, which is a good change from the original. Equipment options have been expanded to not just give you more to choose from, but more uses for them. One of my favorites is Perfume, which gives you advantage on influence checks for an hour against indifferent humanoids. I just picture a shopkeeper going, well, I was gonna charge 100 gold, but you smell so good, so let's make it 50. Tools are also improved, with clear uses, examples of items you can make with them, and an ability check associated with each. Speaking of crafting, those rules are better too, easier to understand and simpler to use. All in all, I think players will get a lot more use out of the equipment in their packs than they currently do in 5e. I may not love every change made to backgrounds and species, but I think this version of character creation is an improvement over what we had before. But of course, there's one more major aspect of the game that's been reworked, and that's magic. Last but not least, spellcasting has also been updated in the new player's handbook. Now every class that can cast spells gets to do so from level 1. No more waiting for your paladins and rangers. Beyond that, every class chooses their spells in the same way. You have a list to choose from, and when you level up, you pick a number of spells that you have prepared to use. Changing those spells and how many you can swap varies from class to class. Some can only do it on a level up, while others can swap out every long rest. How many spells you can prepare also varies by class. In the end, the system is pretty similar to how it was before, but I think it's much easier to understand now, especially since there's no variation between characters of the same class, like with the old rules. Besides how you prepare them, many spells have been given changes in the new handbook. Way more than I was expecting, to be honest. So many of these changes are tiny, an extra damage die here or a change to the saving throw there, but a lot of spells are just better and more functional now. For example, nobody was asking for an update to Dark Vision, but now you can see up to 150 feet away instead of 60. A small change that makes the spell that little bit more usable. Some spells have been completely overhauled though. Conjuration spells are a few that are totally different, but still effective and a lot easier to run in the DM. I don't love all of the changes. Guidance and Healing Word are both even better now, which I don't think anyone asked for, but on the whole, spells are better written and more functional. Just like with the classes though, this does give me a little bit of worry as the DM. Yes, some monsters and enemies have spells, but players are casting the vast majority in any campaign. Across the various lists, spells are doing more damage or healing more HP, effects are stronger, and some spells now do things even when the target succeeds on the saving throw. All of these make the game more fun, but only if, just like with better classes, the monsters can compete too. I hope enemies in the new manual are doing more damage and have access to cooler, stronger abilities themselves, because otherwise, spellcasters may have a field day in combat. Still, I'm happy a lot of work was put into this new spell list. You can see the thought that went into changing old spells and writing new ones, and I think more of them in general will be viable options for characters in the future. Even True Strike is better. What a world we live in. So, what do I think of the 2024 Player's Handbook? In my opinion, this book presents a better version of the game than the old one. The presentation is fantastic, classes seem more exciting to play, spells have been improved, and creating a character has never been easier. Above all else, it looks like these rules will make it more fun to be a player, no matter your class, species, or abilities. If I was starting a campaign right now, I'd be using this one. It's not perfect though. I don't love every update and honestly wish they had gone a little further in changing the core rules of the game. Things like more condition reworks, new skills, and updates to how actions, bonus actions, and reactions work would have been really nice to see. This is an expensive book, so I can see a lot of folks being disappointed by it. But I'm excited for this update, at least when it's complete. The elephant in the room is that this version of 5e is unfinished. Until we get the Dungeon Master's Guide, and more importantly the Monster Manual, it's hard to know exactly how balanced this game will be. Will all of those new class abilities and better spells be put to use against incredible monsters with dynamic stats? Or will it cause more headaches for DMs trying to challenge their party in a game that's stacked against them? Only time will tell. For now, both of my campaigns are in higher levels, so I'll probably finish them in good old vanilla 5e before jumping into these new rules. But I am excited to see how the game takes shape over the next few months, and I'm sure I'll have plenty more to praise and complain about in the future. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you think of the new handbook in the comments, whether you agree with my takes or think I'm way off base. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like is always appreciated, and you should consider subscribing to the Bard's College. I make videos about D&D and DMing, and there's always more to come. But for now, good luck, and remember, crit your players.